TFA fam, welcome back in. It is time for the first look at week 6 waivers. Hope your weeks went well. Let's just dive right into it. But first off the top, we do have bye weeks again this week for week 6, and we are looking at the Vikings, Chiefs, Rams, and Dolphins. That is going to impact some of the ads here, especially at running back, which we will get to. But first, Kev, lead us off. Let's talk about the streaming options at quarterback the folks should be looking at if they need to stream this week.
Yeah, I think there's 4 really good options this week that are all under 50% rostered. And the first one is obviously Kirk Cousins coming off just a monster game on Thursday Night Football, but he looks like he is back. He just torched the Bucs defense, completing 52 of 58 for 509 yards and 4 touchdowns, good for 35 fantasy points. We started to see some flashes leading up to this week, but the Falcons kind of finally put it all together. Now the Falcons head to Carolina to take on a Panthers defense that has allowed the 10th most fantasy points to quarterback, and that's probably actually going to get higher because that hasn't factored in this week with what Caleb Williams was able to do against them. So Kirk Cousins is just a great play next week if people dropped him. So I do really like Kirk Cousins, and he's probably somebody that you can probably hold for a while and just play as you go. So next up, now Derek Carr hasn't played yet, obviously because they play Monday Night Football, but they do get a really good matchup the following week as they played the Bucs, who have allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Like I said, we just saw Kirk Cousins go nuclear against them. He's only rostered in 33% of leagues, so this is a really good matchup here for Derek Carr. And then you have Daniel Jones, who's only rostered 9% of leagues, and surprisingly, he put on a really good performance today, and with a 29-20 win over the Seahawks on the road. He completed 23 of 34 passes for 257 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed 11 times for 38 yards, good for 22 fantasy points. And he did this without Malik Nabers. Jones has now scored 18 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. And he now heads home to take on a Bengals defense that has allowed the 14th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And that number is also going to change pretty significantly after what Lamar Jackson just did to that defense today. So Daniel Jones, and I do expect for Malik Nabers to be back. I would expect him to be back this following game too. So Daniel Jones, Sunday Night Football, I think is in play. And then lastly, I wanted to include him here, Caleb Williams, because people have dropped him. He's rostered at right around 60% of leagues, but Williams had his best day as a rookie quarterback, completing 20 of 29 passes for 304 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed 5 times for 34 yards, good for 23 fantasy points. But like I said, if he has been dropped, he is worth rostering in all formats with a really good matchup against the Jags, who have allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks.
So moving on over to the running backs for week 6, going to kick things off with Tank Bigsby, who is someone we've been telling you to add for the past few weeks. Today clearly outplayed Travis Etienne. Took this from PFF, so I want to give credit where credit is due. The snaps were split pretty evenly up until Bigsby's first touchdown. After that happened, Bigsby played 11 snaps to just 2 for Etienne. So that's definitely something to keep in mind going forward. Frankly, in my opinion, Bigsby has looked like the more explosive back for the majority of the season anyway. So I think there's a chance that this at least turns into like a true running back by committee, with the possibility that Bigsby becomes the 1A in this backfield. Etienne just has not looked the same. If you were watching the game today with Tank Bigsby, that was a lot of like what his college tape looked like, where he would just get like bottled up, but then he would have like these massive explosive runs. And that's what we saw today. So Bigsby's making his way into the ad column. Tyrone Tracy Jr., he's someone else who's been on this list since the beginning of the season. Showed why that was today. Went for 129 yards on the ground. That was a little odd. He only had the 1 reception, considering we are looking at a guy who played receiver for the most part in college, only played running back his last year. I don't think this ends up being Tracy's backfield outright, but I just feel like there's no way that Tracy doesn't earn more touches going forward after this showing. Ty Chandler, again, he's someone who we've been talking about for a while. The thing that sucks here is, you obviously had Aaron Jones go out with the hip injury in the first quarter. He did not return, but they have their bye week next week. We haven't heard anything in terms of, if this is going to be a multi-week absence. Didn't really seem like it, but he was ruled out relatively quickly. Still, I think Chandler is someone who should be picked up. And then Justice Hill is definitely someone who I would want to add. Did not get to the end zone and have the explosive plays this week like he did in weeks prior, but still somebody at the running back position we should be looking at. And then in the handcuff plus territory, looking at guys like Samaje P. Ryan, Tyler Algier, Antonio Gibson, Roshan Johnson, Emmanuel Wilson, and then Jaleel McLaughlin. Among these guys, we got the reports earlier this week with Antonio Gibson that he was gonna, that Ramondre Stevenson was gonna get benched, right? And it was gonna be Antonio Gibson because Stevenson keeps fumbling for the first 4 weeks. And that was like semi-true. Gibson did technically get the start, and he did see more playing time today than he had in the previous weeks. But it was still Stevenson who saw the most opportunity. Gibson only had 6 carries. He's done what he's been doing for the past couple of weeks, where he's putting up high yardage totals on just a handful of carries. You could probably still look at Gibson in like 12 team leagues and higher, but I probably think that we see Ramondre go back to his normal role starting next week. But in case anything happens with the fumbles going forward, Gibson's probably someone who you could have stashed away in your bench. Roshan Johnson, not as many opportunities with Swift looking like an actual running back for the past 2 weeks. The second week in a row, though, where Khalil Herbert has been an afterthought. So you can still look at Roshan Johnson as a bench stash. Then moving over to the handcuffs, saw Blake Corum finally get on the field for the first time after all this prognosticating all off season and the hot takes that Blake Corum was going to take Kyron's job. Still not the case. Corum only played 11 snaps, saw 6 opportunities, but Ronnie Rivers, who had been in that backup role, did not see a single snap today. So if Corum is still sitting out there, you can pick him up and stash him. And then deep ads and stashes here. Just a couple of guys I wanted to talk about that are going to be on varying levels of interest. But Jalen Wright, Travion Williams, Dario Gumbawale, Ty Johnson, and Isaac Gorendo. With Jalen Wright, he averaged 6.6 yards per carry today, saw 13 carries with Achane going out with a concussion. But again, this is another situation where the Dolphins have a bye week next week. So obviously we're expecting Achane to return after that. You have Mostert, who was back in the fold today and healthy. So Wright is only going to be a stash here for me instead of being listed upon the ads. But I think in deeper leagues, you still want to have somebody like Jalen Wright sitting there on your bench in case any of these guys were to go down and miss additional time. Travion Williams, this is going to be related to the Moss injury. He did end up returning briefly into this game, but still something we want to pay attention to. This would only be for like people in like 14, 16 team leagues. This isn't anything even in 12 team leagues we need to worry about. But for those who are in deeper leagues, Dario Gubawale has been looking really good as a pass catcher. Mixon likely returning soon. We thought we were going to get that this week, but he was obviously rolled out once again. But I think Ogunbowale has played well enough that he still might have a role going forward in like as a pass catcher. So again, deep league ad only, not looking him in 12 team leagues. Ty Johnson, he's consistently getting like 20% of the snaps or more, getting a handful of opportunities each week. He's really only in consideration for deep leagues as like a bye week type fill in. But, again, if you're like in a 14, 16 team league, this is really all you can ask for that. And then lastly, with Isaac Orendo, clear back up to Mason, had a season high over 20 yards rushing today. Still only going to be valuable if Mason were to go down. You do have the CMC return looming as well. But again, for those who are desperate in deep leagues, you can look to those guys.
Yeah, first time I just want to say Tyrone Tracy looked phenomenal today. I think he had 0 negative carries the entire game, which is pretty awesome. And the only thing that's frustrating with him is just going to be that Devin Singletary is not going anywhere, right? Like I don't see a scenario where they just bench Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary falls down to the number 2 running back. But if something were to happen long term with him, he looks like he could be a dude for sure. So it was kind of weird that they pulled him off the field on third downs, considering whenever Devin Singletary was playing, that he was playing third down. So like I don't understand that move that what they were doing there. Like that made no sense to me. But regardless of that, he looks really good. And also just a little side note that some news came out. I think what was it last night or yesterday that Christian McCaffrey could possibly be back for the Chiefs game. I think that's week 7. So that we'll have to see. Who knows if that's going to
Yeah.
be accurate or not. Anyways, let's move over to the wide receivers here. And there's not a lot to talk about here this week at the wide receiver position. Just there really wasn't a whole lot of breakouts or anything like that this week. The two I will mention, just because they are rostered in less than 50% of leagues on Yahoo, which I was surprised. Darnell Mooney, I feel like I've just talked about him so much, but I don't know how Mooney isn't rostered in almost every league at this point. He has seen 6 or more targets in 4 of the 5 games. He had a monster game on Thursday night, hauling in 9 of 16 targets for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns for 31 fantasy points. And now he has now scored 14 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. So, like, there is zero reason Darnell Mooney shouldn't be rostered in 100% of leagues. He is on the field for 100% of the snaps. He is going to continue to see a lot of targets within this offense. It is a pretty consolidated target share. So, Darnell Mooney just absolutely should be rostered more than 47% of leagues. The other one is Josh Downs. After his really strong performance last week, I figured he would be well higher than 40%, but here we are. And he's now been targeted 21 times over the last 2 games. Today, he hauled in 9 of 12 targets for 69 yards, and he was targeted four more times than the next closest Colts pass catcher on this offense. So he finished with 15.9 PPR points, and will look to keep things rolling. Though I will say it's not a great matchup against the Titans, who have allowed the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So Josh Downs is definitely another option. Next up, it is Michael Wilson, rostered in 13% of leagues. After only seeing 4 total targets over the first 2 weeks, he has now seen 22 targets over the last 3. Today, he led all Cardinals pass catchers in receiving yards, going 5 for 78. Next week, the Cardinals will head to Green Bay to take on a Packers defense that has allowed the 11th most PPR points to the position. So I do think Michael Wilson is definitely an option here. Jordan Whittington, I kind of thought about putting him a little bit lower because they do go on bye this week. So I don't think he's like a priority or anything like that. But he was targeted 10 times today. He hauled in 7 of them for 89 yards against the Packers. He did leave the game late with an injury, but they are on bye. So, like I said, I don't think you need to go crazy on Fab or high waiver priority because Cooper Kupp could be back week 7 when they return. And then Puka Nacua may not be too far behind either after that. So I don't know how much longer Jordan Whittington, because Jordan Whittington has basically been running all of his routes from the slot. And that's obviously that's kind of the Cooper Kupp role. So we'll see on that. Next up is Alan Lazard, Aaron Rodgers' favorite safety blanket. He finished second on the team in targets, only behind Garrett Wilson. And finally, side note, Garrett Wilson finally had a monster day today. It's been forever since he's actually had a wide receiver 1 week, and now he finally gets back on that side of it. But for Lazard, despite seeing 10 targets, he only caught 4 of them for 34 yards, but he did score a touchdown. Now, he now has 4 touchdowns in 5 games. He has scored double-digit fantasy points in 4 of the 5 games as well this season. But he's only scored more than 13 fantasy points once. So I think he's kind of a low-ceiling flex option on most weeks just because Aaron Rodgers continues to love to target him, especially once they get inside the red zone. Next up is Alec Pierce. I know a lot of people are going to get really excited about Alec Pierce again. He's only rostered in 20% of leagues, but Pierce has scored 60 or more fantasy points in 3 of the 5 games. However, he did it on 3 targets in 2 of those, 2 of the 3 games. They became extremely boomer bust. And I think that's just kind of my view on Alec Pierce. I don't know if you're really going to know when to start him, when not to start him. I think as bye weeks continue to roll on, he can be kind of utilized in good matchups as a flex option. But just remember that he hasn't done this like on heavy volume. He has 1 game, I think, where he's seen more than 5 targets. So he's just run extremely hot in terms of the deep ball target. So Alec Pierce, I definitely think is an option at 20%. Rostered. And then Ray McLeod is only rostered in 6% of leagues, another Atlanta Falcon. McLeod has put up back-to-back flex-worthy performances and now has seen 7 or more targets in 3 of the 5 games, so far making him worthy of a roster spot in 12-team leagues. And then just some deeper league guys. Rashad Bateman, 4%. He's a tough option because the Ravens aren't an offense that throws the ball enough to warrant rostering multiple pass catchers from this offense. But on Sunday, the Ravens trailed most of that game, and they threw the ball 42 times. Bateman caught 4 of 8 targets for 58 yards and a score. I think he's worth rostering in 14-team leagues and larger. I don't think he's quite a 12-man league just because this offense just doesn't throw the ball enough, though he has scored double-digit fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games because of touchdowns. And lastly, next up, it's Darius Slayton, rostered in 4% of leagues. Seemed to have his annual big game on Sunday with neighbors out. Slayton did the heavy lifting with 11 targets. He caught 8 of them for 122 yards and a score. While Slayton has ran 75% of the routes this year, he doesn't really see any targets. He's not earning targets whenever Malik Neighbors is on the field, along with Wandale Robinson. So I think once Malik Neighbors come back, he kind of goes back to that role. But in deeper leagues, I do think he's kind of worth a stash there as well. And lastly, one situation I wanted to monitor or mention, because I know a lot of people are going to be talking about this, because everybody that went out and spent a lot of money on or Fab or high waiver priority on Dontavian Wicks is probably very disappointed because they plugged him in their lineup and he didn't really play out. But a couple of things that I just want to mention: he still led this team in targets today. He had 7 targets, but the problem was Jordan Love only threw the ball 26 times. They didn't really need to do a whole lot. And don't get me wrong, I played a ton of Dontavian Wicks this week in DFS, so he definitely cost me money. But this still is a situation that I think is going to be fine as long as Christian Watson's out. He ran the most routes. He saw the most targets. He only hauled in 2 of them for 20 yards. But he has seen a heavy amount of targets, over the last 2 weeks. I don't think that really changes. I still think it's between him and Jaden Reed. I'm not going to just all of a sudden drop Dontavian Wicks after this down game. Like I said, none of the pass catchers really did a whole lot outside of Tucker Kraft, who had 4 for 88 and 2. So other than that, Jaden Reed had 4 for 78, no scores, and then past that, it was pretty much nothing. So really frustrating day because I played a ton. Not that anybody cares in DFS today because I really love this game environment. I love this offense, this pass catchers, and they didn't do anything. So all I'm saying is I would not go out of my way to go drop Octavian Wicks, just out of frustration that he went 2 for 20. Because I think better days are ahead.
Yeah, just one of those things where everyone's on it. You didn't hear a single person offer any pushback against Wicks. It was all there. It all lined up, but just did not come through. Something else that's not really going to come through this week either are the streaming options for tight end. Not a great week. Going to kick things off with Tyler Conklin. Gets a matchup against the Bills, who heading into this week were giving up the 13th most points per game to tight ends. The Bills have been better against outside wide receivers this season versus stuff going through the middle of the field. So this could lead to more opportunities for Conklin. He has averaged over 7 targets per game over the last 3 weeks as well. Theo Johnson had his best day of his rookie season with no neighbors, which obviously needs to be underscored here, but did go 5 for 48 on 5 targets. Goes up against Cincy in a game where they should be trailing. Could lead to this game could be kind of like the springboard of him to be more involved going forward as well. So you can look his way. K. Doughton, inconsistent option, but has seen 3+ catches and 40+ yards in 3 straight. Jawan Johnson, someone I'm just going to be paying attention to see what happens, not only with the Taysom Hill injury, but to see if his usage keeps up from where it was last week. Obviously, we're not going to have that answer until after tomorrow, but I pay attention to that. And then for folks in deeper leagues, you could pay attention to see what happens with Tommy Tremble. He left today because of a concussion. Because of that, rookie Jatavian Sanders saw 5 targets. He was only able to put up 13 yards on 3 catches with those 5 targets. But we did have Xavier Legette also leave this one with a shoulder injury. So kind of need the stars to align there for Jatavian Sanders. But it's just a name to pay attention to. Again, only for people who are in like 14-team leagues and deeper. But tight end is an absolute dumpster fire. So you might have to look down that far.
Yeah, it really is. And there's a question here about that in a second. But Terry, no, we're not. That's why I don't want to talk about this, like the situation, because I know a lot of people are going to be freaking out because he didn't do anything. I think it had more to do. I say that Wicks cost me so much money. Yes, they didn't throw the ball very much for one. They only threw the ball 26 times today. Like, there's not going to be very many games where we're only throwing the ball 26 times. They kind of had the game in control. But yeah, that has been the one thing with Dontavian Wicks over the last couple of weeks. He has had some drop issues. That's been frustrating, but he's still earning targets. And so that's what I care more about anything. Like, we talk a lot about drops with a lot of players, but if they're dropping a lot of passes, it also means they're earning a lot of targets. So, like, generally speaking, I don't think it's something we should really focus that much on. Yes, it's frustrating because it's costing you fantasy points, but as long as he's still earning targets, I think that's positive. Like I said, 26 times today, or it's only 26 passes was the most frustrating part. Because this Rams defense is so incredibly bad. Their pass defense is so bad. Like, I didn't see that, only throwing the ball 26 times today. And it was still a relatively close game for most of it. Like, it wasn't like it was this big blowout and they just were able to, in the second half, not do anything. So, but yeah, Tucker Kraft was a monster though, so that was good to see that. But and then with Pitts, like this is the tough thing about dropping these tight ends, like with Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews, that like yes, like Mark Andrews at this point probably should just be dropped, but at the same time, like the tight end position is so thin that like
So
I don't
bad.
think all year that Mark Andrews is going to be a zero. Like I don't believe it. Like I think at some point he turns this around and they like I've said and I've said this from week 1 that the injury he suffered is the same one that Tony Pollard suffered, and Tony Pollard, like when he talked about it last year, that like it took him to like week 10, week 11, week 12 where he really started feeling like himself again, where he was able to do a lot of things he was able to do previous to the injury. And that's where I feel like that Mark Andrews is at. Like he just doesn't really feel like the same guy, doesn't kind of look the same guy. Feels like they're just using a little bit more as a block. So I'm not saying that you can't drop Mark Andrews because at this point, what has he done? I mean, I will say he was like 5 yards from scoring a touchdown, which would have changed a lot of people's perspective. But with Kyle Pitts, everyone went out and dropped him, and then look, I mean, he finally had a good game. But I mean, it's just there's not a lot out there to. I mean, it really is thin, and even the guys that we thought were going to be good this year haven't been good. Like even the top guys,
Yeah.
it has been a pretty much dumpster fire for tight ends. So
Another word from Tyler. Would you drop Dell when Collins was out? He still wasn't used. I mean, he's not someone I think that you have to hold on to, but I do think that there's some variance here, I guess, with what happened with Tank Dell. Not doing much. He did catch all 4 of his targets, but I mean, you had Wale going for 57 receiving yards. That's not something that's going to continue. Hutchinson had 31 yards. So there's almost 90 yards between 2 guys who, probably aren't going to see that type of production going forward. So, I mean, Dell he's someone else who has been a disappointment all season. I don't think you necessarily have to hold on to him, but it would also depend on who you're dropping him for. So in a vacuum, I probably still want to hold on to Dell. But it all depends on who you're dropping him for.
absolutely. And the only thing that I would say on that is that the Bills are really good against outside receivers. Like I know that Nico Collins was able to break loose for a long touchdown, but those are more fluky than anything. But I'm just saying, but like that was just a really bad spot for him. It was kind of a gross game too. But I would expect and I hope Nico Collins doesn't miss a lot of time because Nico Collins has been phenomenal. But if he were to miss time, I do think that's great news for Tank Dell. So like
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to drop him yet. I'd want to wait and see on this injury news with that. But as far as Pacheco, we don't know anything yet. Like the Chiefs go on bye after this week, so you'll probably start to hear something over the next couple of weeks about Pacheco and kind of what their plans are for him. But I would expect he probably still is out until like week 10, week 11, something. And then should I trade my neighbors for Kyron Williams and Chris Godwin? Yes. I think I would. As much as that pain, I love Malik Neighbors, but yeah,
Yeah.
with the way Chris Godwin's played this year and Kyron Williams, yeah, you have to make that move. So this one's tough because you're taking on a lot of risk, right, with Cup, and like how does this all play out with him? Even when he comes back, what does he look like? Like so, like, but Kraft is phenomenal. Like Kraft has looked really good. I don't care when when Luke Musgrave is there or not, whether he's healthy or not. I think this is Tucker Kraft's role in this offense, but I don't know. That's tough just because you're assuming a lot of risk. But the upside is definitely there for sure. But I'll also say, for the love of God, of all things holy, can the Browns just fucking bench Deshaun Watson at this point? Like, I understand that he has guaranteed money, but who cares at this point? Like, he looks like he has no business whatsoever playing in the NFL at all. Like, he should be playing in the XFL at this point. Like, you have Jameis Winston as a backup. Who cares? You're paying him the money no matter what. Just bench his ass because he looks awful.
We had some glimpses last week, and I was like, okay, now we get the Commanders. Here's the spot. Here's the spot. Kev, we were talking before we jumped on about like playing too many DFS lineups and being like, well, what if I that was another guy who like I didn't bring up before whenever we were talking about it, but he's someone who I thought about putting a lineup for. Thankfully, I didn't, but that was someone else who's like, well, he's cheap. Great spot.
Yeah, I mean, free Jameis, man, free Jameis, because at this point, there's no shot he can be any worse than what Deshaun Watson's been able to accomplish. So, I don't get it. It is super frustrating.
Certainly cannot be worse. And then from Tyler, thoughts on picking up Pitts? Do you trust him or is a one-hit wonder? I mean, you said you have Ferguson, so Ferguson probably gives you the safer floor. So it depends on who you'd be dropping. I don't think I'd want to drop Ferguson for Pitts, and I don't think I'd want to roster two. So I'd probably just roll with Ferguson.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I don't think you have to. Like, I do think Kyle Pitts is actually a decent tight end. I just think the offense started off really slow. Kirk Cousins started off really slow, but I think we're going to find out that Kyle Pitts, I think, is better than what everyone's freaking out about. But at the same time, I still think I don't want to have two tight ends either. So, and yes, Tyler, I saw this. Watson said at the press conference after the game, "I'm good with they bench me," because he basically was like, "Yeah, if they want to bench me, it doesn't bother me any." And I'm like, I don't feel like he even wants to play anymore. Like, I feel like he's just out there because he has to, because he's trying to collect that contract. Like, I don't think I think if he could today retire, he would retire. Like, I like, he just looks like he has no want to even be out there anymore.
Yeah.
Like, there's no desire. Which everything that's happened. Well, I always say that. I always like because I don't want it not that happened to him. Everything that he did, and everything else, and all the other stuff that's happened. Like, he's just not the same guy anymore at all. Like, he's not the Deshaun Watson, prior to the suspension and all that stuff. Like, he looks like he's checked out. He's done. And so just bench him. Just move on.
Yep.
Or and then cut him and then just move on. It sucks. It's a lot of guaranteed money, but what else you got to do? You got to pay him no matter what. So you just got to keep running this dude out there and just ruining every single week for you.
Yeah, they have to move on.
So, and just like that, that's all. I think that's all the questions we have in here. So, I think probably wrap this up and get out of here. No more questions. So that being said, appreciate everybody rocking with us. Week 5 was at least wasn't as bad in terms of injury department. At least some of the injuries that did happen, those teams were on bye, so hopefully they'll be able to get through. The bye week came at the right time, so it's not like you weren't going to be able to have them next week anyway. So hopefully, other than that, hopefully we don't have any other big injuries over the next game and a half that we have left for this week. We'll be back again shortly this week with our start sit videos. Plus, we'll be having the streaming options video that should come out early Tuesday morning, like it always does. Kickers, and actually, I think I crushed this week in kickers defense, but that's just me. Really, I was looking at it today. Every one of them did really well this week, so that worked. Anyways, that being said, we'll be back again here shortly. Click that like, subscribe button. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.